Hello, listeners to the WholeHearted Leadership podcast. Welcome to another episode. And today I'm very excited to have with me my friend Guan. And Guan has recently written a book called Cultivate. When I read the book, seriously, it's a book about creativity. It actually helps you to embrace conflict to boost creativity. But when I read the book, right, it felt like therapy for me. And I'll share with you why. The book is really about the journey towards embracing your own inner creativity. And it's something that I kind of felt like I will be a closet artist. And the book really spoke to my heart. So let me introduce Guan to you. Guan is the APAC Regional Director, the One Club for Creativity. He sees himself as a leader with creative insights and empathy. I asked him what lights him up, and he said things that are thought-provoking. He likes helping people to see things in new perspectives, especially, for example, when you've seen something and you thought you've seen it all, and along comes something that gives you the unexpected insight that lights him up. Can't you see that I'm very excited about this podcast, and I'm so excited to be talking to you. Guan, welcome to the WholeHearted Leadership podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, Coen.
Fantastic. So, Guan, let's start with some questions that we typically ask our guests. What does wholehearted leadership mean to you?
Well, wholehearted means you do everything with a lot of passion. I think you also do everything with great intention and focus, because without all these things, the leadership would be very weak.
Yeah, but in today's world, right, leaders don't really have all the answers, right? And they're always swimming in so much uncertainty. How can they stay focused and passionate in spite of all these challenges?
Yeah, I think in today's world, there's a lot of distraction. There is a lot of challenges, and also there is a lot of things that can go wrong. I think for me, a strong leader needs a resilience to adapt and change according to the needs and expectation of what's needed. I think a strong leader is also showing a lot of compassion in terms of how they treat their the people under them, and also get to inspire people along the way. I think a strong leader also needs to have a sense of direction, because I've been with leadership that is that's directionless. There's no goal. I think a sense of direction will help people see the light, and also you can convince people that your purpose is much higher, and you are able to lead them in a way that they want to be followed.
I love that. Leading people the way that they want to follow. I love that. Right. So you wrote a book about creativity, and you have always been in the creative industries, right? But your background wasn't like that, right?
Yeah.
When you were raised, right, you were born in a family of, I think we spoke about this before, doctors, right? Tell me about how was it like growing up like that?
Yeah, so I was born into a family of doctors. My mother is a doctor. She has a clinic named after my brother and I. So my brother now he's a GP at Faith. And my father, who passed away 2 years ago, he is probably the most famous doctor in the family. He has a disease named after him called the Tay syndrome. Yeah, and so we're all very proud of the family. For me, I have a really small problem, which I hated to study. So, in Singapore system, when you can't study, you can't really excel. Then it's like you're left behind. But I love to draw. So actually that artistic side really kicked in much earlier. And just drawing led to a lot of different things, right? I mean, led to me getting scolded. It led to me, doodling in a lot of textbooks. And that was not a good thing in those days. As you know, we were all taught to study hard, to, work hard, to memorize well and pass exams. So my mom had a call from the principal, Mrs. Kwan. I remember quite vividly. And she asked my mom and I to go to her office. So when we were there, my heart was beating fast. I was thinking, oh no, will I get expelled? I mean, what's going to happen? But Mrs. Kwan then came, and she had something behind her back. So I thought it was going to be a cane to whack me in those days, right? But then she pulled out, it was the textbook that was doodling. And then she showed it to my mom. And my mom was kind of horrified. She said, oh my God, what's my son up to, right? And the textbooks were just filled with drawings, comics. And remember on the side of the book, there used to be, you could flip and you could, I did some animation too in every corner. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but what Mrs. Kwan said to my mom was something I'll never ever forget. I mean, she then changed her tone. She said to my mom, Dr. Tay, your son is very passionate, very, very creative. You have to keep his passion going and don't really lose it, because who knows, it could be a career in the future. You know, in those days, right, Coen, I mean, it's so difficult to find teachers to really push or encourage. And so when she said that to my mom, I mean, that was something that even my mom and my dad was kind of shocked, like, oh wow, at least, someone's encouraging, someone's there to grow. So from that day onwards, right, I mean, my parents stopped brainwashing me to be a doctor, but that also taught me a very important lesson, which is sometimes collision in our lives or disruption lead us to better things, and that helped me to refocus or reignite my creativity.
Wow. I think it's so powerful, that story, right? It's like the power of somebody in power,
Yes.
in authority,
Yeah.
seeing your value. And of course that definitely was a turning point, right?
Yes.
It's like someone advocated for you, someone
Yes.
believed in you, and also someone who kind of like a very authoritative voice who tell your parents that you need to protect that.
Correct. Yeah.
Wow.
So I mean, you're right. If someone else that wasn't a principal or somebody, maybe with no authority, it might not be so powerful. But I think in school, you get a principal and speaking to my mom, and you thought of the opposite, which is obviously, getting expelled and getting a caning. And that was very, very, enlightening. Yeah.
That's so life-changing, life-giving, life-changing, right? Because I can only imagine like the kind of shame you probably grew up with.
Yeah.
Like the whole family is of doctors, and you kind of feel like you don't measure up.
I mean, you're right. I mean, that my self-esteem and those time was really, really low. And as you know, if you don't study hard, you don't get the A's. You felt really left behind. So actually, art was one way to escape, in terms of all these pressure. And art was one way that you get really excited. I mean, besides drawing too, I mean, those days in the 70s, I mean, there were a lot of science fiction movies like Star Wars, or a lot of special effects were actually being shown on screen and movies, and that got me excited too.
Nice.
So the visual arts was something that really opened my eyes. So whether, could I be working in a movie or could I be drawing somewhere? I mean, that was quite a decision. I mean, what do I do?
Wow. So, I mean, you besides also growing up in a family of doctors, right? That makes you feel the pressure to measure up. But then you were given that permission to.
Yeah.
But you also bullied in school.
Yeah, because the bullying came sometimes because I got a cleft lip. Yeah, and the cleft lip also made me feel very unattractive. And but over the years, I told myself, now who cares, right? I mean, whatever defects or whatever things you had to undergo is the resilience or the kind of push that I told myself. So I think over the years, it's taught me to become tougher. It's taught me to become much more, not so self-conscious about myself anymore.
Yeah, I think that's such a good combination, because it's like artist is about expression.
Yes.
Art is an expression of human emotions and human condition.
Yes.
Right, but an artist who don't express becomes a frustrated, thwarted artist.
True.
So if you don't, one of the reasons why people don't express themselves is because of the fear of judgment.
Agree.
The fear of what will people think, what will people say, will people approve, right? It's like,
Agree.
so an artist who's stuck in approval mode will be forever frustrated.
Agree. Yeah.
And you kind of die with the art in your heart.
Yeah. I guess the upbringing that we have in Singapore, I mean, many years ago, and maybe it's still happening now, is that creativity, to take a risk to become a creative person, yes. I mean, we as we grow older, we're being criticized, right, Coen? As we grow older, there's also risk involved. I mean, what if I say something that people don't like? So you always tend to try and get people's approval. I think art or anything that has to be very creative needs to not only solve a problem, but there must be some outcome, right? I mean, we're not talking about just doing a beautiful painting and get people's approval. Obviously, if you're very famous, you can sell for a lot of money.
Yep.
At the same time, I think creativity today, it's about critical thinking and solving an issue. And I think more than ever, we need to be more creative in the way we think, the way we write, and the way we sort of look at different challenges. So for me, creativity has gone beyond just drawing. I think creativity has gone beyond just a beautiful piece of work.
Yes.
It's got to have purpose.
Yes.
It's got to have meaning in order to solve a challenge, for example.
I love it. I think a lot of times people think creativity is like a soft skill that not necessary, but I think it's so important, right? Especially when you can come up with creative ideas, creative ways to solve problems, and you're actually able to do things faster, more efficiently, more beautifully, more effectively, or maybe like burning less energy, burning less fuel. I think that's also creativity, right? It's like I think that's very much needed in the world that we live in today.
I got an example.
Yep.
So actually, in school, we were taught very simple things like how do you communicate clean, how do you communicate fire, how do you communicate, water. And because of the simple things, that is actually quite difficult. So in one assignment, we were taught, let's communicate clean. It can be visual, it can be copy, it can be anything you want. But just that, how do you communicate something that is unforgettable? So I went back home. I mean, this was in school. I went back and then I drew the most beautiful, dustbin into a broom.
Yep.
And I thought, wow, it's going to score big because it's so beautifully drawn. Right? So in school, we presented all the artwork. And those days, you had to paste stuff on the wall. There wasn't the use of computers. I mean, you had to hand draw everything.
I remember those days.
Correct. Then, so someone drew a mother because cleanliness. Someone drew, like, say, a clean sheet of paper. Yeah. Then I drew my, dustbin and broom, which I thought was very beautiful. But then the teacher, so I was studying in America. So at that time, teachers saw everything, said, oh, all predictable, all boring, all very, very flat. Then you have this American student at the time. He was not shaven. I think he also smelled like he drank a lot, right? And I thought, wow, he doesn't look like he's going to study. I mean, he doesn't look like he's put a lot of effort. What do you think he's going to show, right? So he pulled out a magazine. And the magazine is no ordinary magazine. It was an X-rated magazine. I think on those days it was Playboy.
Yeah.
Then he took out and showed the centerfold. And when he showed it to class, right, it was shocking. It was like, oh my God, I mean, what's he doing? Especially everybody was disgusted with what he was doing. Yeah. It was so disgusting, right? And then what he did was amazing, right? He took the magazine and tore it into a million pieces and threw it in the air. Then he said, clean is to destroy dirty. And that was the principle behind my book, because he communicated clean, right? But he did it in the opposite direction. And he took something, an item that was so disgusting that provoked a lot of emotion. But when he destroyed dirty by throwing everything, it was a sense of performance, a sense of relief, and a sense of like, wow. And I mean, he got an A. And so that taught me that creativity isn't like, wow, you paint something beautiful. It's how you perform, how you create, and how you tell a story. So he told a beautiful story.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think in Singapore culture or Chinese culture, we're very straightforward. Okay, do clean. Okay, just do clean. Do dirty, do dirty. But creativity is going opposite. That means you don't do exactly what you've been told. Find another way to come up with a solution, because it is much more unexpected and more surprising.
I love it. I I was reading your book, right? There was a page that was written upside down.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of very, very unexpected examples. Even your book, right, which is possibly a book for businesses.
Yeah.
But it was written in a very playful way, right? It's like I can sense a lot of your personality in the book, and then that was like so awesome, right? It's like, I don't know, I just enjoyed reading your book. I told you, right, in preparing for this podcast, a few weeks ago, I kind of like thought I'll spend some time reading through your book.
Yeah,
thanks. But I didn't realize that I went down this rabbit hole of like your book is so unputdownable. I actually spent like one shot and one sitting, read 70% of your book. Yeah. And I never actually done that for a book for a long, long time. Yeah. I thought it was quite...
I mean, there is a lot of books about creativity. I mean, I have to admit. and the only way to stand out is to have an attitude. So the way it's written is witty, sarcastic in some tonality, some parts, but also unexpected. Like you said, there's a page that's upside down. There was also a page that's just black, and the title says "Do it in the dark." I don't mean someone, a couple doing it in the dark, but it was about when you actually close your eyes, you are much more creative because your senses will pick up, the other senses will pick up. So these are all scientifically based. I had to do a lot of research in terms of how you can boost your creativity, but again, written in a way that has a bit of attitude and wit.
Was it easy for you to write a book like that?
No, it's not. So I'm not really a born writer. I'm creative in terms of an artist. But I think over the years, so I've been working for advertising or digital marketing for the last 28, 30 years. And obviously we need to understand the craft from both sides, right? Visual and copy. So that really taught me to handle it quite well. Actually, in the book, if you actually open a page, right, there's a visual and there's a copy on the right. So these two things actually go hand in hand, because I treated it like something that you would see and then what you would read.
Yeah, I think what the hardest thing about creativity is sometimes when an idea is so creative, right, people don't have a context for understanding it, right, and they kind of like dismiss it.
True.
Right, like for example, when Henry Ford first came up with the idea of the automobile, he thought it futile to go and ask his target audience, like, what do you want?
True.
People would typically say, I want a faster horse, right? They wouldn't have conceived of an automobile.
Correct.
Right. So how do creative people circumvent this challenge?
Well, I think I just said something in the beginning, about the example of clean.
Yeah.
So when people say clean, you got to think dirty. So one way that we normally do is try to think completely opposite. So that's one way we can actually come up with interesting things. So when we do our creative work in marketing, we always talk about the tension. What are the challenges? Who is the enemy? If you think about all the movies we've seen, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Superman, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the enemy is a small kryptonite.
Yeah.
I mean, Batman as a Joker. Every single story, every single movie or film you've seen has this enemy and challenger that makes it interesting. Imagine you have a great story, like perfect couple, they got a baby, they married happily ever after. It's really, really boring. So the other example that always I bring up is Shrek, right? I mean, Shrek it was one of the first few fairy tales that debunked everything, whereas the hero was a monster, the princess was ugly, and Prince Charming was evil. And did they live happily ever after? Yes and no. But at the same time, it was the story was actually so unexpected and so interesting that it was one of the best-selling movies at that time.
Yeah, it's like kind of like relatable, right?
Yes.
It's like people want to be, the alter ego wants to be some superhero, but something more relatable is like their day-to-day life.
Yes,
they're imperfect, they're flawed, they are not so like perfect, right? Something that's so perfect is also of course not, it's boring, right? It's like when everything is perfect, the story is perfect, your life is perfect, it's boring, right? So people actually want something that's relatable. Yeah.
So I have the 3 R's when I think about most of the work that I do. I think one R you just said, which is relatable.
Yep.
The second R is relevant. Is it relevant to you?
Yep.
And the last R is real, which is authentic. So real, relevant, relatable are the 3 R's I use in terms of reviewing work or when I look at a piece of nice creative work.
Yeah. The thing is, like, what's the difference between real and relatable?
Relatable is something that I think in our life we can relate to it.
Yep.
Relevant is depending on the situation. So for example, COVID.
Yep.
There's a issue, then it's relevant. So sometimes I'll take work that people can that's relevant in the particular time and the culture. So for example, National Day in Singapore, we'll do a National Day ad. So we create some work that is relevant to the occasion or the context.
Okay, got it. So relevant. I think that's something very important as well. I think I was just having a chat with somebody recently also about the cuisine and the food that we eat. Right?
Yes.
It's like a lot of times we don't realize that cuisine that we eat, the food that we eat, right, even the cooking styles is very governed by the relevance
Yep.
of the culture, also the economical development of the particular region, of a particular place, and also like the economic status of people. Like for example, in Philippines, right, there's this dish called the adobo, which is their national dish.
Yep.
But I think it really came from the more agrarian kind of a background where, when you're farmers, right, it's like typically where you harvest the vegetables and food, and also when you say slaughter an animal and you cook right, the meat, right. But then you normally have so much meat that you cannot keep, right. You cannot actually store in a refrigerator, right. That maybe in those days either refrigerator weren't invented, or people cannot afford refrigerators. So what do? They keep this meat left over and they kind of like cook it into a stew with soy sauce and vinegar, because soy sauce and vinegar is known to be able to preserve the food. And then lo and behold, you have the adobo, which is like a stew mixture of everything cooked in vinegar and soy sauce. So a lot of times we tend to think of creativity as this like big, hairy, unattainable thing that is only accessible for people who are extremely creative. They are born with creative genes, right? But I think human beings are all creative people. We all just make the best of what we have at any given point in time, and sometimes making the best of it, being resourceful, is actually the necessity. Is actually the mother of creativity in that sense. And also constraint is another reason for creativity, because if you have constraints, it forces you to be more creative, to make the best of your current resources and situations.
So talking about food, right? Yes, I think food is also a collision in terms of different cultures. So if you think about East and West, right? There's always a combination. There's also food, because food is based on the richness of the culture and the taste. And when you try and combine the two, it becomes very interesting. Because one principle in my book, which is very relevant and something that you said, how can we become more creative, is that when you think of something so original and so creative, right, it scares people because it's something that I don't relate to it. So one of the theories in my book, and just through observation, is that if you collide or smash up two familiar things together, you get something unfamiliar, and that becomes creative in my aspect. So for example, in a restaurant, right, you could say where China and USA collide, right? So playing off with the political issue, you could create a dim sum burger. So it's a dim sum and a burger.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work, creative work that you see, I mean, like, Shrek or Superman or everything, right? There is a sense of something familiar.
Yeah.
Let's think about zombie movies, right? You've seen zombie movies in terms of the horror genre. But there's zombie movies that's a musical. There's zombie movies that's a love story. There's zombie stories that's on a train to Busan.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So zombie is familiar, but when you pair with another interesting, familiar situation, it becomes a wonderful, original story.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
that's right.
Smashing or colliding two unfamiliar items of ideas or things, you can create something, very unfamiliar.
Nice. We say collide is also embracing conflict to boost creativity,
Yes.
right? And of course, there are few things about human nature, right? Human nature is like we don't like conflicts. Second thing is also just on the word you mentioned, tension.
Yes.
I think very often tension is something that we don't deal well with, right? But we don't actually realize that tension is very much part of life, right? Without friction, without tension, without friction, without resistance, aeroplanes can't fly. Aeroplanes fly because of the lift that's created with the airflow over the wings, right? That's how aeroplane gets lift, right? That's how planes can fly. So resistance and tension is sometimes a good thing, right? Without tension, a lot of things can't work. Like a pulley system can't work, right? These are all tension. So I don't know why are we human beings so so avoidant of conflict, or are we so frightened of tension? Because tension is actually what creates creativity.
Yeah, I think there's various degrees of tension and conflict and things that go with our lives, right? Obviously, what I'm talking here is creative conflict and creative tension.
Mm.
In terms of like marital issues or things that
Relational
your
tension.
relationship tension, I think that obviously requires a psychologist in terms of dealing with it.
Yeah.
But having said that, the creative conflict that I'm focusing here is that most of the time, creative is born out of finding a solution, because there's always a problem to be solved, and that's coming to my point, right?
Yeah.
What is creativity? So creativity, today's world, can be seen as finding a very innovative way to solve a problem. Because without finding a way to solve a problem, then it's just like a pretty picture. You know, you can draw a beautiful butterfly. But if this butterfly is, is helping to, maybe for example, it's something that you want to do with mental health, and the butterfly helps you to see things in a different light, then the butterfly has some purpose in terms of what creativity is supposed to do.
Yeah. Also, I think the whole idea of, since you mentioned the butterfly metaphor, I just can't resist myself, right? That when a caterpillar goes from a caterpillar to butterfly, it actually goes through a process of chrysalis, right?
Yeah.
But many people don't actually realize. People just think that the caterpillar spins a cocoon and then breaks out the cocoon as a butterfly.
Yeah.
But many people are not aware that part of the process is when the caterpillar actually, in order to turn into a butterfly, its body actually go into a semi-molten state.
Oh no, yeah.
Yeah, if you actually realize that inside the cocoon, right, the body actually goes into a semi-molten state, and that itself is quite gross, but also a little fascinating to think about it, isn't it? It's like, in order to go through a certain metamorphosis.
Yep.
Right. So I think very, very much people, when it comes to creativity, they can be quite impatient. They expect creativity on demand, right? But actually creativity requires a lot of energy, a lot of tension, if you like to put it that way. Like how how carbon under a lot of pressure and tension turns into the diamonds, right? It's like the metamorphosis needs to take place. Just like you can't actually help a butterfly become a caterpillar become a butterfly by sticking wings onto it, or you cannot help a caterpillar to become a butterfly by giving them a helping hand in terms of breaking up the cocoon. They actually disempower, right? So I think we live in a very fast world, right? It's like how do creative types like maintain your creativity, maintain that creative innocence when the pressure is always to be faster, better, stronger?
That's a really, really good question. I think being a creative, you always have to stay curious by learning or experiencing new immersive experience, looking at how people do things, but you need a lot of stimulus. Yeah, stimulus is important. So whether you go into an art museum, or you watch a play, or you see something, going to nature for a walk. So the experience that you gather over the years, right? Or the experience you go and watch a show, the experience that you read a book or watch a movie, those experiences will come back in some way when you're trying to think of ideas. So you try to form a kind of a pool of immersive experience that you can then generate and hopefully use that for the future. So to stay creative, I think you need to continue to absorb things like a sponge. Because once you stop absorbing, then you got nothing else to give.
Yeah. But then what do you say to people with this fixed mindset that creativity is either born or not born? Right? I personally think that creativity can be trained.
Okay. People can learn to be creative. That is for sure.
Okay.
But how talented they are to take it from, to the next level or to a fantastic level, you do still need some talent. I mean, for example, if I want to sing, right, I can train to sing by learning all the notes.
Yeah.
But if my performance is not very good, or if I don't look that well, or I don't have this stage presence, it's very, very tough for me to be a top star.
Yeah.
So I think we can all learn to be creative, because that's something that can be taught. But to get to the next level, I think you do still need a bit of talent. But at the same time, I think through a lot of hard work, I see a lot of people also attaining quite far.
So is talent nurture or nature?
Some people does it faster than others.
I think it's also about playing within your zone of genius, your gifts.
Yeah.
But also I think I have a very interesting perspective, right? It's like I think it's about sensitivity. Many people don't understand this thing. People often just use the word sensitivity as
Yep.
like, oh, you're too sensitive, you're overly sensitive. But we actually don't realize that we are sensitive to different things, right? Some people are more sensitive, like maybe to, if you talk about the word sensitive, came from the word sense. Sense is about your 5 sense. So a person who's, for example, more sensitive olfactory-wise may actually end up becoming a nose. A nose is actually not the anatomy on your face. The nose is actually a occupation. The nose is a person who is a professional perfumerist.
Oh yeah, I know
So
that.
they can actually smell
Yep.
perfume and know, oh, this has bergamot,
Yep.
or this has, ilang ilang and all that. So, like, if you have a particular sensitivity towards a certain area, right, you can actually develop.
Yep.
So that's what your teacher did for you, right? Your teacher said, hey, Guan has this particular sensitivity of capturing ideas through images, right? So your teacher gave you a big leg up in terms of like pushing you to go and pursue that sensitivity, right? So I think it's also about really being aware of your own sensitivities. Like, what are you more sensitive about? For me, right, I'm actually very sensitive to sound, right? Like when I hear a loud sound, when I was young, right, when there's thunder, right, I will hide underneath the bed. And sometimes when I'm talking to you, let's say for example, and someone is like taking out a bread from a plastic bag, and then it makes that shh sound. It messes up with my listening of you, and I might even have to tell the person, can you stop doing that sound? The rustling sound actually affects my ability to tune into the person I'm talking to. And so I'm very sensitive to sound, and like being a coach, being a speaker, I think that's also how I bring this sensitivity to play, right? It's like I'm very sensitive to how people express their ideas, like the voice, the tonality of their voice, whether there's any change in the pitch, whether there's any change in the voice, like it tells me, oh, someone is getting anxious, someone's getting excited, someone's getting provoked, triggered, or whatever. So I think one gateway to understanding your talents to me is sensitivity. Like, I don't know where you sit on that hypothesis.
Sensitivity is a key one, because if you're not sensitive, you're not aware what's happening, then you're not able to, either understand what the issue is. I think creativity is also a lot of confidence. So when, like I told you, when it's younger, when you're not confident, you think you're like maybe an imposter syndrome and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But when you start to gain that confidence, right? And I've seen people are so confident, you start to believe in themselves though. So I think besides talent, right, is that the belief in yourself that you can become who you think you are. And that belief sometimes can overpower talent. At the same time, you also need to build your credentials, or your creative credentials. So it's not just believing it without any. So that's what I mean by staying curious, by, actually having a good mentor. I mean, a creative mentor.
Yeah.
For me, when I started my career, I started in a very good agency, which was in Saatchi & Saatchi, Singapore.
Oh.
So you surround yourself with very good people. So the environment where you play, or the environment where you grow up, the environment where you are inspired, plays a big role.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of everything needs to make sense at that point of time. If you're not interested about creativity, you're not passionate, you're not resilient, and you don't really feel like it, obviously you can't be creative.
Yeah.
So that first step about being creative is, why do we want to be creative? I think we need to ask ourselves. Yeah. I mean, we just like, hey, I just want to be creative for no reason. So if some people, say I'm a comedian, right? I want to make people laugh. Okay, let's say I want to make people laugh.
Yep.
That's my end goal. Then I have to be creative to make people laugh.
Yep.
So without knowing your end goal, like, okay, I want to draw the most expensive painting that will sell. But then why would people buy? Yeah, why would people buy? So understanding your purpose or creativity is important to be a good creative.
Interesting. They mentioned about humor and comedian, right? Actually, humor, right? The word humor comes from the same root word, hummus, hummus. Not the hummus that you eat,
Yeah.
the Middle Eastern food.
Yeah.
But hummus, as in, is a Latin word for ground.
Ground. Okay.
Yeah. So hummus, the word humor,
Yep.
humanity, and humility all come from the same root word. It's about
Right.
being on the ground.
Interesting.
Yeah. So a lot of times, a comedian, right, is funny because they're relatable.
Yeah.
They're real.
And
And they're relevant.
Yeah.
right? So,
Exactly.
for example, why? I mean, people also often say, like those stand-up comedians, right? The kind of jokes that is always about sex, it's always
Yeah.
about politics, it's always about complaining about work,
Yeah.
right? But why are these funny? It's because it's relevant,
Yep.
right? Like people feel the pain of work.
Yep.
There are certain taboo things they can't say. Maybe people feel a certain way about political situation, but they just almost feel they don't want to be too politicized.
Yep.
Or obviously there's some sexual tension, right? It's like, men and women, or men and men, women, women. It's like you have certain attraction towards certain people. And obviously, if you're married or you're seeing someone, you're in a committed relationship, it's almost like there's this tension that's there, but you just can't quite put a finger to it. You can't really quite talk about it because it's very taboo. It almost makes you sound like you are a cheater or you are a polygamous person, right? So then therefore there's a lot of tension there, right? So that's why, jokes about sex, men and women, racial discrimination, right? These are the kind of things that becomes perfect fodder for comedy, right? Because there's so much tension there.
Mm-hmm.
So people don't realize that actually when people laugh, right, it's an exhalation of tension.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a balloon that's built up with a lot of tension, and then suddenly you say something that makes people burst out in this like outburst of laughter, like ha 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 ha, because that's like that exhalation of the tension that's been built up.
True.
So I think actually a lot of these are all creative, right? A lot of these are based on what you just said, right? It's like conflict, tension, right? It's like the clever use of the dynamics of this thing, right? It's like that's what makes things funny. That's why being humorous, right, is actually being very humane. It's being very real. It's being very relatable. It's being very, very relatable. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Since you just mentioned that, I just can't help but I mean, I've always been studying different people, right? It's like I'm very curious about documentaries, how they think. I'm curious about comedians, how they think. I'm curious about magicians, like how they actually think. Many people think magicians about performing the trick. Yes, the trick is part and parcel of what you do, but there's a hygiene. The successful magicians and the not so successful magicians is really about the presentation skills,
the storytelling,
the presentation skills, the ability to create tension, misdirection, surprise factor, right? Understanding what is the customer journey, right, or whether the audience journey, and then you upend that, you kind of like twist it, and you surprise them. It's about storytelling, right? So, I mean, I can geek out with you over and over about all of these different things, right? So, like one, I mean, what are some of the challenges for you as a creative person? Do you feel like sometimes you are a little lonely, in that no one joins you in the creativity, no one understands you, or do people sometimes marginalize you and think, oh, you're just weird, you're so different that they can't understand you? Like, what are some of the challenges you have, not just growing up, but also even today, right, in the corporate world?
I think creativity today is very different than when we were growing up. I think it's much more open with a lot, social media, with lots of platforms, especially now with AI playing a big role. I think it's about finding the right balance, especially in the business world, right? So I mean, I do have to speak to the clients, and I also do have to balance in terms of what I should say, how I should present. So it all depends on who my audience is, right? So if my audience is very creative, yes, I'm allowed to have more freedom to be more creative, and they expect you to be very creative, because if you present something boring to a creative audience, then it's really, I mean, it's like a magician. Sorry, it's like a magician sharing with other magicians, right? So they have to up their game. Then for clients that might not be very creative or scared of being creative, you need to give some logic to the creativity. So you need to make sure that the storytelling is based on factual. So it's a balance between storytelling with credible data. And then I think there are other people who are also looking at how you tell stories, but it's more emotional at the same time. So if you touch, like I think you mentioned, if you're able to tell a bit of a story that also touches your audience, then it becomes more compelling to them. So I think understanding your audience, knowing your content, and knowing which emotion to trigger is key in terms of being a good creative person.
Yeah. So interesting. So creativity is also about knowing the like you say, the audience journey and the emotions that they face, right? It's like how to trigger, right? But okay, how do you actually go about mapping this out? Do you have like a creative process? Like, do you map out something in your head and then you go and map it out and then create it, or is there a process for that?
Are you talking more like to do a speech, or are you talking more to give a marketing solution? So I mean, there's many
Different contexts, right?
different contexts. Yeah. So, for example, if it's about creating a speech for the people, understanding again the audience is key. Knowing how much time you have, and also seeing what I have to play with. So if I have a place to show the creative work, it's great. Is there something that I can show physically that I can bring along? I think it's about creating enough stimulus that people can be excited, in terms of what you want to share, what you want to show. Because creativity is not just blah, 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 right? And it's quite boring. But it's about showing visual, color, scent, sound.
Yes.
So there are some speakers creative that plays music, right? That's very creative. There's some speakers that do magic show, like you mentioned. There's some speakers that uses props that makes it creative. So I think having the right tool at the right time in the right environment will help to boost your creativity.
Okay, but what about people who do have all this access to all these tools and environment? How can they be more creative?
I think coming back to what I just shared, they have to think something different. Because if you say exactly what everybody's saying, I don't know how you can become very creative. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when I say think something different, if maybe they should write down all the things that they would want to do.
Okay, good.
Then think opposite. That means, okay, for example,
yes.
like I told you, right? Clean. You think of, like dustbin and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Then on opposite, dirty, right? So how the thought process, if we want to do it in the future, dirty means, dirty magazine, dirty politician, dirty money, dirty laundry. You see?
Yeah.
Then for example, if I were to think clean, I would then maybe talk a joke about the dirty politicians. So that would help if you have a list of all the expected stuff and another list of completely opposite. And then with those two lists, you can actually you can come up with some interesting solutions.
Very nice, very nice, very nice. So basically what I'm saying is that writing it down actually gives you that kind of visual stimulants to say, okay, this is what it is. And then the other way is, of course, dichotomy. Everything exists. A lot of things in life exist in dichotomy.
Right.
Right. It's like,
and also besides writing, you can find images. So obviously now with a lot of free stock image, right? You type in clean, you get all the images.
Oh, that's a good one. Yes.
Yeah. So images actually helps you to think of something differently, because words are one thing, but images helps to bring the words to life. And people now, visual communication is more powerful than verbal communication.
Yes.
So in a slide, you have strong visual with very little words. Actually, less is more.
That's so powerful. Like I also recently learned a visual facilitation, and so I've been like doing a lot of different like visual to actually bring things together, right? And even right now, the tools that we have on our in our for example, disposal, right? Like Canva. Right, Canva Pro, right, has got a very, very powerful AI machine that actually helps you to like reimagine certain images, right? And so I think a picture tells 1,000 words, and I think a story tells 1,000 beliefs. So it's so powerful.
I mean, the thing with AI today, right? It's a very good executor and a tool. So, for example, if you ask AI to draw something, it's beautiful, but it's just beautiful. You still need to come up with a story that makes it relevant. That
kind of like tie everything together, storyboarding the entire image and visual. So first of all, is there any questions I haven't asked you that you feel I need to ask you?
No, I think you're doing pretty well. Yeah, I mean, it was just going with the flow.
Okay, great. So, Guan, I think you set a lot of very, very good examples, like the advertisements of Carl's Jr., the Volvo advertisement, everything like that. These are all very creative and all. And of course, whenever we read a lot of creativity books or we search for creativity examples, we always we have a lot of very good real world ideas, right? But of course, a lot of us are not like about to create the next big thing, right? Or none of us are maybe like shooting advertisements. But we we think of creativity in the relevance
Sure.
and in the context of our day-to-day life.
Sure.
Right. So I'm just going to free associate a bit, and I'm going to force you to collect a few ideas and see
Sure.
how interesting you are, how interesting those ideas are.
Sure.
Sorry. Let me try. Okay. So how can people be more creative in their career development?
I think number one, creativity, career development also needs to get people to be relevant in your career. People need to know who you are, right?
Yep.
So for me, career development isn't about, say, doing up a nice CV. I think it's about making a very creative LinkedIn profile and and the opportunity that you post can be very creative.
Yeah.
So the way you write, right? I mean, that we were taught to be creative is make sure the first line is like shocking.
Yep.
Like, I've been fired.
Yep.
But actually, when you read down the whole post, something good came out of it.
Yep.
So one thing about creativity, like I show you, right? It's about maybe creating some evoke an emotion. So you can really start that doing your LinkedIn profiles and posts.
Fantastic. That remind me of a friend of mine who used to work with Singapore Airlines.
Yes.
As you can imagine, Singapore Airlines is like a very government stat board related kind of business. But he joined the Toastmasters and he learned public speaking, and then we always thought about starting strong. So he actually applied what he learned in writing his speeches into his email headings.
Yes.
So he's an accountant, by the way. He's in the finance department. He's an accountant in Singapore Airlines. But in order to get people to open his email, that means his email open rates, right? He has very creative subject matters. And whenever people receive an email from him or receive his emails, they are like amused by the subject matter, and then they will click open and read and then reply. So he actually gets things done faster as a result of applying some of the things he learned from speaking or public speaking into email writing. That's one example.
So the attention span that we have is getting shorter and shorter. So I think there was I don't know whether it's well researched, but our attention span is shorter than a goldfish. But if you look at research from TikTok or Facebook or any Instagram, it's about like 3 to 5 seconds. So if you don't do anything, especially on social media, in 3 to 5 seconds to hook someone, I think nobody's really interested. So whether it's a video that you say, whether it's a dance that you're going to do, or whether it's something you want to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. So I think for career development, your ability to capture people's attention to whether it's an idea you're pitching or is it just a simple email that you need people to act upon, right?
Yeah.
Capturing their attention gives you the opportunity to get more of their time, to invest their time, and then as they finish reading the email, there's a call to action that says, hey, reply as soon as possible or make your decision. Then you can actually get things done faster.
Yeah. So I think every time when you talk about career development, you always bullet point all your CVs. Like, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. But it's very, very boring. So what you need to do is to tell stories between the biggest pitch you made, or tell a story of a client. Obviously, you might not use their name, of how you overcome the challenges and also sold something really big. So you can actually turn the facts into storytelling.
That's what I do. That's what I teach people to do, right?
Yes.
But what you actually can create a portfolio of client success.
Yeah.
So straight away you stand out.
Yes.
Awesome. What about creativity? Let me give another extra one. Creativity in parenting.
Wow, that's a difficult one. So my wife is probably better than me when it comes to parenting, but
correct answer.
I mean, this is not easy. So having stubborn kids I think we got to find another approach though. For example, I mean, I did this quite a number of years ago, and maybe you need to do it again. Like spending time with my daughter, right? I mean, normally we'll take them to go shopping, we take them to go to the park, right? But I sometimes spend time with her in Roblox though.
Roadblocks?
Yeah, Roblox. So, Roblox, you can visit parks, you can go and play games together. Roblox is like a metaverse.
Oh,
yeah, Roblox, yeah. So, I mean, instead of going to a real world, it's a virtual world that you spend time with. Yeah.
Okay, so it takes you into different places. A bit like Pokemon Go like that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I guess parenting, I mean, it's no easy way, but I think the most important is to spend time with, with our kids, right? In a way that they feel like they can relate into what's happening in their world.
Nice. So whatever, it's like you need to be empathetic of what your kids like also,
True.
and really entering into their world.
Yes.
So to your point, really, like colliding is really about really also entering into people's world and like suspending your own biases, your own judgment, and that will actually help you to become more creative.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
I think it's about finding creative ways that okay, you need to so as we are talking about, our clients, right? So if your target market is your kids and how old they are, is understanding their passion points first of all.
Yep.
And how the passion points can relate to what you're trying to teach them.
Mm.
So instead of scolding, nothing gets through, or you're nagging, is there another way to get the point across by using something that they're passionate about?
Nice.
Yeah. So there's a project that we did actually. This is related to BBDO, which is my former agency. So we have a client called the Ministry of Health Holdings, and they're recruiting people to join the healthcare business. And the healthcare business and Gen Z, right? I mean, Gen Z doesn't want to join. So we tap into the Gen Z's passion point, which is about gaming. Gaming. And not just gaming, it's Fortnite gaming. Most of the game, you play, to kill, to win. I mean, that's mostly the game, right? So we created a game that allows you to heal. So the more you heal, the more you win. So it's colliding in terms of using similar game platform, but changing the dynamics and changing the rules of winning.
My goodness, I love that. Right? I mean, I'm very much in the healing space also. It's a lot about like therapy and everything. I'm not a therapist, but I'm a big proponent of therapy.
Yes.
And I'm a big believer that we all need to also like heal from our past trauma and everything. But this is the topic that's always so heavy.
Yeah.
Right? It's so heavy that it actually a lot of people just switch off from that. Right? But if we can actually gamify that.
Yes.
No, you just give me a lot of ideas right now. So I'm just thinking, how can we actually gamify that?
Yeah. True.
I mean, actually, if you have an idea, let's talk. It's like maybe that can be the next winner.
Definitely.
Okay, final one, right? It's like how can we be more creative in this existential thing called finding our life purpose? How can we be more creative in finding our life purpose, Guan?
I think the life purpose, it's about finding your inner self, right?
Yeah.
And some people call it inner theme, or finding what is it that you're passionate about.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of people finding their inner self is one thing, but if you don't need to make money, I mean, if you're rich and you find your inner self, then you can just do exactly what you want, and it's self-funded. But for example, finding your life purpose, I think you need to link with what you're passionate about to what people are willing to pay, and what you're good at. Because finding your purpose and not knowing what you're good at is also useless.
Yeah.
So these three things, right? Finding what you're good at, finding your purpose, and maybe finding a little circle of what people are willing to pay. In the center is a very sweet spot that you can continue to fulfill your purpose and yet make a career out of it. Yeah.
So I think it's about creating like pockets of time for intentional play.
Yeah.
And intentional play is also like part of your who you are, right? Actually, it's the playful state.
Yep.
I think we're all born into this world to play as well. And
Yeah.
I think something that we need to relearn.
Yes.
We need to unlearn the whole paradigm around work, and really relearn the idea of play, the importance of play. Right? It's like kids just want to play, right? It's like until you tell them to do homework, everything.
Yep.
But if we can gamify it and make it fun, right? They will do it.
Yep.
And sometimes who we are is also what we are attracted to is fun, right? If we can just indulge, give ourselves like intentional time for us to consciously engage in play. Maybe we can call it conscious play. We're actually getting closer to who we are essentially, our essential self.
True.
Fantastic. So much to dig into. Is I think we can go on and on. Probably we'll come to the end of this podcast.
Sure.
And typically we end. I hate to end this podcast so soon because I have so much to discuss. But we'll probably just end with some quick fire questions.
Sure.
Like typically the questions we ask is like some questions like short questions that you just answer in short 1 or 2 sentences. So first question, what's the most powerful question you have ever been asked before?
Wow, that's a very tough one. Most powerful question. Maybe when my boss asks me to change something for a piece of work that I don't think that I should change. And he had to stand up for it.
And what did he ask you?
I think asked me to change a typeface or something. It was something small. Yeah.
Okay.
No, but I think powerful in the sense of because it was something that you believe you shouldn't change, right?
Yeah.
So I think it was a tension point that you don't feel like it's not right, but because you're tasked to do, I think you had a lot of emotion invested in this thing.
And that's powerful also, right? Because
Yes.
it also forces you to either strengthen your own resilience and your own conviction, your idea,
Yes.
or then it also train your curiosity.
And
or
also
your
train in
openness.
resilience. Yeah.
So
Your
interesting.
self-belief.
So interesting. I really love it. I mean, I love that we started on the topic of resilience in today's podcast. I think very often people forget that creativity requires resilience.
Yep.
And resilience requires creativity.
True.
Very often people think of just one or the other, and then they think of it as two separate topics that have very little relevance to each other. But
Yeah.
you need a lot of
True.
creativity, a lot of resilience to be creative.
Mm.
Who's a mentor or supporter besides Mrs. Kwan, who has made the biggest difference in your life?
I think both my parents. Yeah, very, very strong. I mean, my dad and my mom, supported me through school after knowing that, art is one of my passion. So that's really strong. I think along the way, I think there's some advertising people along the way that sort of helped. But they're all different ways. There might not be mentors in people who actually tell you exactly what to do, but it's mentors through examples.
Nice. What is one of the most courageous things you have ever done in your life that's made all the difference?
Made all the difference. I think, I don't know whether it's about making difference, but I went diving onto in one of the, I think probably Phuket, using the air sort of helmet. I think that was probably the most interesting experiences. Yeah, I don't know whether
How did that change your life?
it's interesting because you thought it was quite fun, but when you're in that position, I thought, oh my god, what is it actually worth it? When you were, I think I remember it was in Thailand, and it also was quite cheap, wasn't like super expensive, so I don't know whether it was safe or not. And I think it changed my life because what you take for granted was something you shouldn't take for granted. Like anything can happen when you're on holiday, right? Anything can happen when you're actually doing something fun. So that was a good lesson for me.
You're on a collision course with the Earth. And you discovered gravity. Interesting. Okay, great. If our listeners would like to find out more about your book and also the work that you do, and how can they get in touch with you?
Please look into my LinkedIn under Guan Hin Tay. Yeah, LinkedIn. So that would be the best.
Okay, and also your website to your book, and we'll put all this in our show notes. And thank you very much for sharing. Right, it's like I think there's a lot of room for creativity in the world that we live in today. I think your message is very, very relevant and very necessary. So thank you once again.
Hey, thanks, Coen. It was really enjoyable.
Thank you.
Take care.